Second iteration. With subsequent drawings of the fractal curve, sudden changes may appear. Ian Malcolm. The shore of the inland sea. Alan Grant crouched down, his nose inches from the ground. The temperature was over 100 degrees. His knees ached despite the rug layers pads he wore. His lungs burned from the harsh alkaline dust. Sweat dripped off his forehead onto the ground. But Grant was oblivious to the discomfort. His entire attention was focused on the 6-inch square of earth in front of him. Working patiently with a dental pick and an artist's camel brush, he exposed the tiny L-shaped fragment of jawbone. It was only an inch long and no thicker than his little finger. The teeth were a row of small points and had the characteristic medial angling. Bits of bone flaked away as he dug. Grant paused for a moment to paint the bone with rubber cement before continuing to expose it. There was no question that this was the jawbone from an infant carnivorous dinosaur. Its owner had died 79 million years ago at the age of about 2 months. With any luck, Grant might find the rest of the skeleton as well. If so, it would be the first complete skeleton of a baby carnivore. "Hey, Alan!" Alan Grant looked up, blinking in the sunlight. He pulled down his sunglasses and wiped his forehead with the back of his arm. He was crouched on an eroded hillside in the Badlands outside Snakewater, Montana. Beneath the great blue bowl of sky, blunted hills, exposed outcroppings of crumbling limestone, stretched for miles in every direction. There was not a tree or a bush. Nothing but barren rock, hot sun, and whining wind. Visitors found the Badlands depressingly bleak, but when Grant looked at this landscape, he saw something else entirely. This barren land was what remained of another, very different world, which had vanished 80 million years ago. In his mind's eye, Grant saw himself back in the warm, swampy bayou that formed the shoreline of a great inland sea. This inland sea was 1,000 miles wide, extending all the way from the newly upthrust Rocky Mountains to the sharp, craggy peaks of the Appalachians. All of the American West was under water. At that time, there were thin clouds in the sky overhead, darkened by the smoke of nearby volcanoes. The atmosphere was denser, richer in carbon dioxide. Plants grew rapidly along the shoreline. There were no fish in these waters, but there were clams and snails. Pterosaurs swooped down to scoop algae from the surface. A few carnivorous dinosaurs prowled the swampy shores of the lake, moving among the palm trees. And offshore was a small island, about 2 acres in size. Ringed with dense vegetation, this island formed a protected sanctuary where herds of herbivorous duck-billed dinosaurs laid their eggs in communal nests and raised their squeaking young. Over the millions of years that followed, the pale green alkaline lake grew shallower and finally vanished. The exposed land buckled and cracked under the heat, and the offshore island with its dinosaur eggs became the eroded hillside in northern Montana, which Alan Grant was now excavating. "Hey, Alan!" He stood, a barrel-chested, bearded man of 40. He heard the chugging of the portable generator and the distant clatter of the jackhammer cutting into the dense rock on the next hill. He saw the kids working around the jackhammer, moving away the big pieces of rock after checking them for fossils. At the foot of the hill, he saw the 6 teepees of his camp, the flapping mess tent, and the trailer that served as their field laboratory. And he saw Ellie waving to him from the shadow of the field laboratory. "Visitor!" she called, and pointed to the east. Grant saw the cloud of dust and the blue Ford sedan bouncing over the rutted road toward them. He glanced at his watch. Right on time. On the other hill, the kids looked up with interest. They didn't get many visitors in Snakewater, and there had been a lot of speculation about what a lawyer from the Environmental Protection Agency would want to see Alan Grant about. But Grant knew that paleontology, the study of extinct life, had in recent years taken on an unexpected relevance to the modern world. The modern world was changing fast, and urgent questions about the weather, deforestation, global warming, or the ozone layer often seemed answerable, at least in part, with information from the past. Information that paleontologists could provide. He had been called as an expert witness twice in the past few years. Grant started down the hill to meet the car. The visitor coughed in the white dust as he slammed the car door. "Bob Morris, EPA," he said, extending his hand. "I'm with the San Francisco office." Grant introduced himself and said, "You look hot. Want a beer?" "Jesus, yeah." Morris was in his late 20s, wearing a tie and pants from a business suit. He carried a briefcase. His wingtip shoes crunched on the rocks as they walked toward the trailer. "When I first came over the hill, I thought this was an Indian reservation," Morris said, pointing to the teepees. "No," Grant said, "just the best way to live out here." Grant explained that in 1978, the first year of the excavations, they had come out in North Slope octahedral tents, the most advanced available. But the tents always blew over in the wind. They tried other kinds of tents with the same result. Finally, they started putting up teepees, which were larger inside, more comfortable, and more stable in the wind. "These are Blackfoot teepees, built around 4 poles," Grant said. "Sioux teepees are built around 3. But this used to be Blackfoot territory, so we thought—" "Uh-huh," Morris said. "Very fitting." He squinted at the desolate landscape and shook his head. "How long you been out here?" "About 60 cases," Grant said. When Morris looked surprised, he explained, "We measure time in beer. We start in June with 100 cases. We've gone through about 60 so far." 63 to be exact, Ellie Sattler said as they reached the trailer. Grant was amused to see Morris gaping at her. Ellie was wearing cut-off jeans and a work shirt tied at her midriff. She was 24 and darkly tanned. Her blonde hair was pulled back. "Ellie keeps us going," Grant said, introducing her. "She's very good at what she does." "What does she do?" Morris asked. "Paleobotany," Ellie said. "And I also do the standard field preps." She opened the door and they went inside. The air conditioning in the trailer only brought the temperature down to 85 degrees, but it seemed cool after the midday heat. The trailer had a series of long wooden tables with tiny bone specimens neatly laid out, tagged, and labeled. Farther along were ceramic dishes and crocks. There was a strong odor of vinegar. Morris glanced at the bones. "I thought dinosaurs were big," he said. "They were," Ellie said, "but everything you see here comes from babies. Snake water is important primarily because of the number of dinosaur nesting sites here. Until we started this work, there were hardly any infant dinosaurs known. Only one nest had ever been found, in the Gobi Desert. We've discovered a dozen different hadrosaur nests, complete with eggs and bones of infants." While Grant went to the refrigerator, she showed Morris the acetic acid baths, which were used to dissolve away the limestone from the delicate bones. "They look like chicken bones," Morris said, peering into the ceramic dishes. "Yes," she said, "they're very bird-like." "And what about those?" Morris said, pointing through the trailer window to piles of large bones outside, wrapped in heavy plastic. "Rejects," Ellie said. "Bones too fragmentary when we took them out of the ground. In the old days, we'd just discard them, but nowadays we send them for genetic testing." "Genetic testing?" Morris said. "Here you go," Grant said, thrusting a beer into his hand. He gave another to Ellie. She chugged hers, throwing her long neck back. Morris stared. "We're pretty informal here," Grant said. "Want to step into my office?" "Sure," Morris said. Grant led him to the end of the trailer, where there was a torn couch, a sagging chair, and a battered end table. Grant dropped onto the couch, which creaked and exhaled a cloud of chalky dust. He leaned back, thumped his boots up on the end table, and gestured for Morris to sit in the chair. "Make yourself comfortable." Grant was a professor of paleontology at the University of Denver and one of the foremost researchers in his field. But he had never been comfortable with social niceties. He saw himself as an outdoor man, and he knew that all the important work in paleontology was done outdoors, with your hands. Grant had little patience for the academics, for the museum curators, for what he called teacup dinosaur hunters. and he took some pains to distance himself in dress and behavior from the teacup dinosaur hunters, even delivering his lectures in jeans and sneakers. Grant watched as Morris primly brushed off the seat of the chair before he sat down. Morris opened his briefcase, rummaged through his papers, and glanced back at Ellie, who was lifting bones with tweezers from the acid bath at the other end of the trailer, paying no attention to them. "You're probably wondering why I'm here." Grant nodded. "It's a long way to come, Mr. Morris." "Well," Morris said, "to get right to the point, the EPA is concerned about the activities of the Hammond Foundation. You received some funding from them." $30,000 a year, Grant said, nodding, "for the last 5 years. "What do you know about the foundation?" Morris said. Grant shrugged. "The Hammond Foundation is a respected source of academic grants. They fund research all over the world, including several dinosaur researchers. I know they support Bob Carey out of the Tyrol in Alberta, and John Weller in Alaska, probably more." "Do you know why the Hammond Foundation supports so much dinosaur research?" Morris asked. "Of course. It's because old John Hammond is a dinosaur nut." "You've met Hammond?" Grant shrugged. "Once or twice. He comes here for brief visits. He's quite elderly, you know, and eccentric, the way rich people sometimes are, but always very enthusiastic." "Why?" "Well," Morris said, "the Hammond Foundation is actually a rather mysterious organization." He pulled out a Xeroxed world map marked with red dots and passed it to Grant. "These are the digs the Foundation financed last year. Notice anything odd about them? Montana, Alaska, Canada, Sweden. They're all sites in the north. There's nothing below the 45th parallel." Morris pulled out more maps. "It's the same year after year. Dinosaur projects to the south, in Utah or Colorado or Mexico, never get funded. The Hammond Foundation only supports cold-weather digs. We'd like to know why." Grant shuffled through the maps quickly. If it was true that the Foundation only supported cold-weather digs, then it was strange behavior, because some of the best dinosaur researchers were working in hot climates, and there are other puzzles," Morris said. "For example, what is the relationship of dinosaurs to amber?" "Amber?" "Yes, it's the hard yellow resin of dried tree sap." "I know what it is," Grant said. "But why are you asking?" "Because," Morris said, "over the last 5 years, Hammond has purchased enormous quantities of amber in America, Europe, and Asia, including many pieces of museum-quality jewelry. The Foundation has spent $17 million on amber. They now possess the largest privately held stock of this material in the world." "I don't get it," Grant said. "Neither does anybody else," Morris said. "As far as we can tell, it doesn't make any sense at all. Amber is easily synthesized. It has no commercial or defense value. There's no reason to stockpile it. But Hammond has done just that over many years." "Amber," Grant said, shaking his head. "And what about his island in Costa Rica?" Morris continued. 10 years ago, the Hammond Foundation leased an island from the government of Costa Rica, supposedly to set up a biological preserve." "I don't know anything about that," Grant said, frowning. "I haven't been able to find out much," Morris said. "The island is 100 miles off the west coast. It's very rugged, and it's in an area of ocean where the combinations of wind and current make it almost perpetually covered in fog. They used to call it Cloud Island, Isla Nublar. Apparently the Costa Ricans were amazed that anybody would want it." Morris searched in his briefcase. "The reason I mention it," he said, "is that, according to the records, you were paid a consultant's fee in connection with this island." "I was," Grant said. Morris passed a sheet of paper to Grant. It was the Xerox of a check issued in March 1984 from InGen Incorporated, Farallon Road, Palo Alto, California. Made out to Alan Grant in the amount of $12,000. At the lower corner, the check was marked, "Consultant Services, Costa Rica, Juvenile Hyperspace." "Oh, sure," Grant said. "I remember that. It was weird as hell, but I remember it. and it didn't have anything to do with an island. Alan Grant had found the first clutch of dinosaur eggs in Montana in 1979, and many more in the next 2 years. But he hadn't gotten around to publishing his findings until 1983. His paper, with its report of a herd of 10,000 duck-billed dinosaurs living along the shore of a vast inland sea, building communal nests of eggs in the mud, raising their infant dinosaurs in the herd, made Grant a celebrity overnight. The notion of maternal instincts in giant dinosaurs, and the drawings of cute babies poking their snouts out of the eggs, had appeal around the world. Grant was besieged with requests for interviews, lectures, books. Characteristically, he turned them all down, wanting only to continue his excavations. But it was during those frantic days in the mid-1980s that he was approached by the InGen Corporation with a request for consulting services. "Had you heard of InGen before?" Morris asked. "No." "How did they contact you?" "Telephone call. It was a man named Gennaro or Giannino, something like that." Morris nodded. "Donald Gennaro," he said. "He's the legal counsel for InGen." "Anyway, he wanted to know about eating habits of dinosaurs, and he offered me a fee to draw up a paper for him." Grant drank his beer, set the can on the floor. "Gennaro was particularly interested in young dinosaurs, infants and juveniles, what they ate. I guess he thought I would know about that." "Did you?" "Not really, no. I told him that. We had found lots of skeletal material, but we had very little dietary data. But Gennaro said he knew we hadn't published everything, and he wanted whatever we had. And he offered a very large fee, $50,000. Morris took out a tape recorder and set it on the end table. "You mind?" "No, go ahead." "So Gennaro telephoned you in 1984. What happened then?" "Well," Grant said, "you see our operation here. 50,000 would support 2 full summers of digging. I told him I'd do what I could." "So you agreed to prepare a paper for him?" "Yes." "On the dietary habits of juvenile dinosaurs?" "Yes." "You met Gennaro?" "No, just on the phone." "Did Gennaro say why he wanted this information?" "Yes," Grant said. "He was planning a museum for children, and he wanted to feature baby dinosaurs. He said he was hiring a number of academic consultants and named them. There were paleontologists like me, and a mathematician from Texas named Ian Malcolm, and a couple of ecologists. A systems analyst. Good group." Morris nodded, making notes. "So you accepted the consultancy?" "Yes. I agreed to send him a summary of our work. What we knew about the habits of the duck-billed hadrosaurs we'd found." "What kind of information did you send?" Morris asked. "Everything. Nesting behavior, territorial ranges, feeding behavior, social behavior, everything." "And how did Gennaro respond?" "He kept calling and calling, sometimes in the middle of the night. Would the dinosaurs eat this? Would they eat that? Should the exhibit include this? I could never understand why he was so worked up. I mean, I think dinosaurs are important too, but not that important. They've been dead 65 million years. You'd think his calls could wait until morning." "I see," Morris said. "And the $50,000? Grant shook his head. "I got tired of Gennaro and called the whole thing off. We settled up for 12,000. That must have been about the middle of '85. Morris made a note. "And InGen? Any other contact with them?" "Not since 1985. "And when did the Hammond Foundation begin to fund your research?" "I'd have to look," Grant said. "But it was around then, mid-'80s. "And you know Hammond as just a rich dinosaur enthusiast?" "Yes." Morris made another note. "Look," Grant said, "if the EPA is so concerned about John Hammond and what he's doing, the dinosaur sites in the north, the amber purchases, the island in Costa Rica, why don't you just ask him about it?" "At the moment we can't," Morris said. "Why not?" Grant said. "Because we don't have any evidence of wrongdoing," Morris said. "But personally, I think it's clear John Hammond is evading the law." I was first contacted, Morris explained, by the Office of Technology Transfer. The OTT monitors shipments of American technology which might have military significance. They called to say that InGen had two areas of possible illegal technology transfer. First, InGen shipped 3 Cray XMPs to Costa Rica. InGen characterized it as transfer within corporate divisions and said they weren't for resale. But OTT couldn't imagine why the hell somebody'd need that power in Costa Rica. 3 Crays, Grant said. Is that a kind of computer? Morris nodded. Very powerful supercomputers. To put it in perspective, 3 Crays represent more computing power than any other privately held company in America. And InGen sent the machines to Costa Rica. You have to wonder why. I give up. Why? Grant said. Nobody knows. And the hoods are even more worrisome. Morris continued. Hoods are automated gene sequencers, machines that work out the genetic code by themselves. They're so new that they haven't been put on the restricted lists yet. But any genetic engineering lab is likely to have one if it can afford the $500,000 price tag. He flipped through his notes. Well, it seems InGen shipped 24 hood sequencers to their island in Costa Rica. Again, they said it was a transfer within divisions and not an export, Morris said. There wasn't much that OTT could do. They're not officially concerned with use. But InGen was obviously setting up one of the most powerful genetic engineering facilities in the world in an obscure Central American country, a country with no regulations. That kind of thing has happened before. There had already been cases of American bioengineering companies moving to another country so they would not be hampered by regulations and rules. The most flagrant, Morris explained, was the Biosyn rabies case. In 1986, Genetic Biosyn Corporation of Cupertino tested a bioengineered rabies vaccine on a farm in Chile. They didn't inform the government of Chile or the farm workers involved. They simply released the vaccine. The vaccine consisted of live rabies virus, genetically modified to be non-virulent. But the virulence hadn't been tested. Biosyn didn't know whether the virus could still cause rabies or not. Even worse, the virus had been modified. Ordinarily, you couldn't contract rabies unless you were bitten by an animal. But Biosyn modified the rabies virus to cross the pulmonary alveoli. You could get an infection just inhaling it. Biosyn staffers brought this live rabies virus down to Chile in a carry-on bag on a commercial airline flight. Morris often wondered what would have happened if the capsule had broken open during the flight. Everybody on the plane might have been infected with rabies. It was outrageous. It was irresponsible. It was criminally negligent. But no action was taken against Biosyn. The Chilean farmers who unwittingly risked their lives were ignorant peasants. The government of Chile had an economic crisis to worry about, and the American authorities had no jurisdiction. So Louis Dodgson, the geneticist responsible for the test, was still working at Biosyn. Biosyn was still as reckless as ever, and other American companies were hurrying to set up facilities in foreign countries that lacked sophistication about genetic research. Countries that perceived genetic engineering to be like any other high-tech development, and thus welcomed it to their lands, unaware of the dangers posed. So that's why we began our investigation of InGen, Morris said, about 3 weeks ago. And what have you actually found? Grant said. Not much, Morris admitted. When I go back to San Francisco, we'll probably have to close the investigation, and I think I'm about finished here. He started packing up his briefcase. By the way, what does juvenile hyperspace mean? That's just a fancy label for my report, Grant said. Hyperspace is a term for multidimensional space, like three-dimensional tic-tac-toe. If you were to take all the behaviors of an animal, its eating and movement and sleeping, you could plot the animal within the multidimensional space. Some paleontologists refer to the behavior of an animal as occurring in an ecological hyperspace. Juvenile hyperspace would just refer to the behavior of juvenile dinosaurs, if you wanted to be as pretentious as possible. At the far end of the trailer, the phone rang. Ellie answered it. She said,
He's in a meeting right now. Can he call you back?
Morris snapped his briefcase shut and stood. "Thanks for your help and the beer," he said. "No problem," Grant said. Grant walked with Morris down the trailer to the door at the far end. Morris said, "Did Hammond ever ask for any physical materials from your site? Bones or eggs or anything like that?" "No," Grant said. "Dr. Sattler mentioned you do some genetic work here." "Well, not exactly," Grant said. "When we remove fossils that are broken, or for some other reason not suitable for museum preservation, we send the bones out to a lab that grinds them up and tries to extract proteins for us. The proteins are then identified, and the report is sent back to us." "Which lab is that?" Morris asked. "Medical Biologic Services in Salt Lake." "How'd you choose them?" "Competitive bids." "The lab has nothing to do with InGen?" Morris asked. "Not that I know," Grant said. They came to the door of the trailer. Grant opened it and felt the rush of hot air from outside. Morris paused to put on his sunglasses. "One last thing," Morris said. "Suppose InGen wasn't really making a museum exhibit. Is there anything else they could have done with the information in the report you gave them?" Grant laughed. "Sure. They could feed a baby hadrosaur." Morris laughed, too. "A baby hadrosaur. That'd be something to see. How big were they?" "About so," Grant said, holding his hands 6 inches apart. "Squirrel size." "And how long before they become full-grown?" 3 years, Grant said, give or take. Morris held out his hand. "Well, thanks again for your help." "Take it easy driving back," Grant said. He watched for a moment as Morris walked back toward his car, and then closed the trailer door. Grant said, "What did you think?" Ellie shrugged. "Naive." "You like the part where John Hammond is the evil arch-villain?" Grant laughed. "John Hammond's about as sinister as Walt Disney. By the way, who called?"
"Oh," Ellie said. "It was a woman named Alice Levin. She works at Columbia Medical Center. You know her?"
Grant shook his head. "No."
"Well, it was something about identifying some remains. She wants you to call her back right away."